So I got a pretty interesting question in the comment section of the podcast that I just put up, and I figured that rather than just typing out an answer, it'd be easier just to explain it in this video here. So the question here comes from Moist Penguin. It says, honestly, knowing Gaethje over the course of his whole career is only at this level of jiu-jitsu makes me kind of sad. Makes me wonder if it's a lack of effort over the years or if he tried but just isn't that smart to get to a high level on the ground. Not that I know personally much about jiu-jitsu, LMAO. Can you give your thoughts on the idea of ranked fighters trying to learn jiu-jitsu for years and years and not being smart enough to get to a high level on the ground? So first off, I made a comment in the podcast that I think a lot of other people have noticed as well, that when Justin Gaethje was on the ground, it wasn't just that Khabib looked fantastic on top, but it was also that Justin Gaethje looked like he had no idea what he was doing off of his back. And that was something a lot of people noticed. And Gaethje's been in MMA for a while. So it's like, well, if he's been doing this for so long, why did he look like he had no idea what to do? Just a brief highlight showing what had happened. So that was after he landed a leg kick. But he lands this leg kick here. He gets taken down. Now, Gaethje is an All-American wrestler, so he does know how to defend a takedown, and he kind of sprawled out of this. But then Khabib turns the corner. Gaethje looks to just sort of walk his way up, leaves a bunch of space for the hooks to come in. I guess typically in a wrestling situation, they're not always throwing the hooks in. But you have to know when you're fighting Khabib, he's going to do that. Ends up turning, gets his back to the mat. Doesn't really offer much defense here. Khabib throws a leg over. Kind of has the forearm in there, which is somewhat of a defense, but even still, Khabib looks to go for an armbar. At this point, it's not entirely clear what Gaethje's trying to do with this hand here. So then falls right into a triangle. Khabib gets the triangle and gets the finish. So that's what people are talking about when they're saying what happened there with Justin Gaethje. Why did it look like he didn't know how to defend himself? That was the finishing sequence where it was pretty quickly after he got taken down. He got submitted in the second round. In the first round, he was caught in a submission attempt after like getting taken down in the last 20 seconds. So the question was, why does it look like Justin Gaethje doesn't know what he's doing off of his back? Is it that he's not smart enough to understand jiu-jitsu, or is there something else at play? So first off, I'll just say from my experience in jiu-jitsu, there have only been a couple people where after a prolonged period of time, where I'm talking like over a year, where it just seemed like they're making minimal to no improvements. And in the cases that I've seen that, the issue hasn't been that I don't think the person's smart enough to understand jiu-jitsu. I think the issue is more just that they're not very aggressive. So it's like when they want to go for something for their own offense, they really just don't commit much to it. So they really can't get much offense off. And then also they just, I don't know that I'd say afraid is the right word. It kind of makes it sound bad, but it's like when things get physical, they kind of, they don't really do well in scrambles or other physical situations there. So when you're putting your offense on them, they kind of shy away and don't do a whole lot to defend. And when it's their turn to be on offense, they don't really ever commit to something. That's the type of people who typically have problems learning jiu-jitsu over a long period of time. For Justin Gaethje, with him being an elite wrestler, getting to the point where he's a Division I All-American, those are not things I would assign to him. And based off what we've seen from him, his grappling in his MMA career, I wouldn't assign those issues to him either. Jiu-jitsu, it's just one of those things where I haven't seen it be an issue where someone's just not smart enough to understand it. Even if you aren't like able to like get to the point where you're playing chess, where you're like thinking like 3 or 4 moves at a time, even if you're thinking a couple moves at a time, like that would still put you in a better spot than what we saw from Justin Gaethje in this fight. So I just think from what I saw out of Gaethje here, it's not that he's not smart enough to understand jiu-jitsu. I just think that he decided coming out of college that he already had wrestling. Wrestling is one of those transition type of arts where it's like you can either use your wrestling and say, okay, I have a good wrestling base, I'm getting into MMA now, I'm going to learn some jiu-jitsu on top of that. So after I take guys down, I can pass their guard, I can control them, I can find submissions. Or you take the approach that Gaethje did, where he's like, okay, I've got power in my hands, I've got a really good chin on me. I'd like to get into firefights. I've got pretty explosive hips, which is good for defensively sprawling, but also we've seen has been good for his offensive leg kicks. So then from there, he decides, okay, I'm going to make my focus to use my wrestling in reverse to defend takedowns, and I'm going to work on my striking primarily. And it seems as though that's really been the path that he's taken in his career. Now, I will say, if you're picking up any individual sport, whether that's tennis, whether it's MMA, wrestling, generally, if you want to have early success, your best bet isn't going to be well-rounded at everything. So to put a number on it, for example, if you're saying tennis has like a ranking system where it's like a 3.0 level player, a 3.5 level player. If you had a 3.0 match and you had one guy who was 3.0 forehand, 3.0 backhand, 3.0 serve going up against a guy who is like a 3.5 forehand, but a 2.5 backhand, even though the backhand's worse, I'd actually put my money on the guy who has the better forehand, because he can, as long as he can keep the tennis match in that area and hit as many forehands as possible, he'll have the edge. Same type of thing with wrestling. If you've got like a varsity level double leg and a sophomore level single leg, if you can force that double leg a lot, you're going to win a lot of JV matches. So it's that sort of idea as well. So I think going early in a career, specializing in something is not a bad idea if you want to win early. And in the case of Justin Gaethje, for him to specialize in making his focus striking, and if he does have to get into grappling exchanges, just relying on what he had with that D1 All American level wrestling at the lower levels, I don't think that was the worst idea. The thing is that if you are going to specialize in certain skills at a lower level, you still have to backfill the other skills that you weren't focusing on the entire way through. And it really seems as though Gaethje never really took the time to backfill the jiu-jitsu that he was leaving alone while he was working so heavily on his striking. And to be fair to Gaethje, the lack of backfilling his jiu-jitsu really showed in this fight against Khabib, against a guy who not only had the wrestling to take him down, which there aren't a whole lot of guys in the division who have that, but then also had that top grappling style that was more of like a jiu-jitsu, and in his case, the sambo style, where he's actually like trying to pass guard, advanced positions, and get submissions rather than just to hold you down and get wrist rides like a lot of other high-level wrestlers would do. So if you look at some of Gaethje's earlier fights and you say, well, what if rather than spending as much time as he did on striking, he would have taken some of those striking classes and focused on jiu-jitsu instead? Would he have beaten Edson Barboza the way he did? Would he have beaten Donald Cerrone the way he did? Maybe that is the case. But eventually, if you are focusing on certain areas and you're not backfilling it, you're either going to face a guy who's going to be able to exploit your weakness, or you're just going to face someone who's completely well-rounded, more well-rounded than you, and they'll be able to, again, exploit the weakness that way. So for Gaethje, over the point of his career to get to where he's at now, it does make sense that he put his focus on so heavily on striking, and he was able to rely on his defensive wrestling to get him this far. And to this point, most guys who he's fought haven't taken him down. The few who did take him down, he got up pretty quickly. It just so happens that in this case, he was fighting a guy who could really exploit that weakness, and he really did exploit that weakness. So again, moving forward for Gaethje, the lack of jiu-jitsu that he has at this point, it's probably not going to be a major issue with most guys he fights. If you look at the lightweight division in terms of guys who have the ability to take him down, you've got Michael Chandler, but Michael Chandler is more of like a traditional wrestler when he gets down there. It's not like Chandler's the type of guy who's going to throw in his hooks, try to take back mount and start attacking for chokes right away. And then you have Islam Makhachev, who's more of a Khabib style. That could be a difficult matchup for him moving forward. But for the most part, most guys that he faces off against, what Justin Gaethje has prepared for himself to this point is probably going to be good enough for him to still be pretty good. But to me, the lack of jiu-jitsu here, it wasn't as though he's been training this whole time and been doing like 3 or 4 jiu-jitsu classes a week and that's where he's at. I just think that he has kept his focus away from that. And I've seen other high-level MMA fighters who've done the same type of thing where they decide they want to primarily make themselves a striker, and their idea of grappling is just learning how to get up. It's not learning how to fight off your back. It's not learning how to set up sweeps. It's not learning how to set up submissions off of your back. It's just turn around and get up. Just get up at all costs. And it seems like for Justin Gaethje, that's what his focus is. Whatever grappling classes he's been doing have effectively just been working to wrestle his way back up to his feet. And when he's fighting against a guy here where he wasn't in a great position to wrestle his way back up, or when the typical wrestling defenses of turtling away end up leading to getting your back taken, he just didn't really have anything to fill in from there, and that's definitely going to cost him. Now, if Gaethje does decide based off this fight that he wants to really put a big focus into jiu-jitsu, do I think he could improve a lot over a couple of years? Definitely. It would be important for him, given that he is a Division I All-American, that if he wants to get better at fighting off of his back, it's very easy for high-level wrestlers when they get into jiu-jitsu to not want to concede top position when they roll, so then they can get decent at guard passing and get a decent top game, but their bottom game still tends to lag behind because they're not putting themselves in those positions. So for Gaethje, if he does want to focus on jiu-jitsu, it would be important that most guys he rolls with, he's going to be a better wrestler and be able to get top position if he wants it, that he'll actually have to allow his partners to be on top and learn to fight off of his back from there. But again, there's a couple guys in the division at this point where there's a decent chance of them putting him on his back. With Michael Chandler, again, it's hard to say what it would look like on the ground if Chandler gets Gaethje down. With Makhachev, it's definitely going to be a problem for him. But even if Gaethje just only focuses on jiu-jitsu for the next couple of years, that Makhachev matchup could still be a difficult one for him anyway. So I think at this point, he sort of pigeonholed himself for what he is. It's worked to this point. It's just when you don't backfill those skills, this is something that can happen, and that's what happened to Gaethje. So I don't think it's too stupid to learn jiu-jitsu. I don't think that he couldn't get really good at jiu-jitsu if he really wanted to. I just don't think that he's put any focus on it to this point, and it really showed in this fight.